met the hippie under the elm.
Hi,
Tromping home.
I love that song. Hi, it's Kathy Giordano. Welcome to Charlestown and Beyond. Hope everyone is well today. Here it is, May 3rd, and it's 90 degrees outside. How do you figure this New England weather? Aren't we lucky? Very special show today. Extremely special for me because I have a very dear friend sitting beside me today. And the whole show is going to be dedicated to my good friend, Gerard Doherty. Welcome, Gerard.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'd like to tell you about how I got involved with the Kennedys. Many people ask the question, and this is how it happened. Is in 1946, I had just graduated from Malden Catholic, and Bunker Hill Day, which we celebrate in Charlestown with a parade and many other festivities, was on, and it went right by the house. And we had probably 40, 50 guests. My mother was dead, but my father was a retired fireman. He was very anxious to be helpful, and he would provide lemonade for marches. Anyway, almost at the beginning of the parade, there was a band from Brookline, St. Mary's, and they went marching by playing a song, The Bells of St. Mary's, and everybody, our parish was St. Mary's, everybody got very excited. And in the beginning of the parade, there was this sort of a scraggly group of fellows led by, there were four of them, led by a fellow with a very skinny fellow who had a tan suit and a soft hat on, and by coincidence, the parade stopped in front of the house. My father furnished them with lemonade and started a chat with the fellow with the hat, and told them, introduced me to him as going to Harvard, and the fellow went to Harvard and was sort of excited, and after a few minutes, he introduced himself, and his name was John Kennedy. We chatted, and I wished him well, and off they went. And after that period of time, I went to Harvard and got through almost all the way through my sophomore year, and I found out I had tuberculosis, and so I had to leave school, and I was in Saranac Lake, New York, for 2 years in bed. We were in bed 20 hours a day, and I spent 20 months there, and then I came back and went back to Harvard as a junior. And while I was in bed, I had a roommate who was a linguist, and he was teaching himself Russian. And when he was leaving, he asked if I wanted any of his books, and so it was before television. I said, sure, give me your Russian books. So I taught myself Russian, and so when I went back to Harvard, I ended up taking intensive Russian, which was 4 years of Russian in 2 years. And I ended up doing pretty well, and then later I went into the healthcare field, and I ended up getting married to my wife, Marilyn, with whom we were married for over 60 years, and unfortunately, she was deceased a couple of years ago. Anyway, we, during that whole period of time, I got interested in politics, and our local representative was leaving, and there was going to be an open seat, and so.
So what year was this, Gerard?
This would be 1956.
1956.
And so I was at a function, a reunion of a lot of people that I had played football with, and they were talking about who was running and who had a chance, and there was a girl that I went to St. Mary's with who sat opposite me at the dinner, and she said, Gerard is the one who should run. He's got the background. And so I ended up with their encouragement running and ended up winning. And then when I was installed, about a week after, we got an invitation to go to a reception that was being held by our senator, John Kennedy. And so I went there with about 10 other newly elected members, and he recognized me, came over and gave me a big hug, and we chatted, and everybody, some of them were a little upset that he spent so much time with me. However, I became very friendly with some of his helpers who, for the most part, they came out of Charlestown. And
We had Dave Powers.
there was Dave Powers and Frank Morrissey and Billy Sutton.
Billy Sutton, yeah.
And
Yeah.
so what we ended up doing is becoming very close, and I had a lot of Mickey Mouse things that they wanted me to do, to deliver literature and do some other things, and in return, they were very good about helping me get jobs at the Navy Yard. And the important thing was when Christmas came, each shop in the Navy Yard had a big Christmas party, and they had more toys than they had kids. And so the Kennedy people called me and said, could you use these toys? So I ended up having toys from about 6 Christmas parties. Towards the end of it, one of my friends said, well, if you're going to do this, why don't you play Santa Claus? So they gave me a Santa Claus suit. So I ended up for 5 years playing Santa Claus with a pillow on my tummy, and in the meantime, I stayed very, very friendly with the people around Kennedy, and then
So now we're going on now, you're saying 5 years. How long did you serve as state representative for
Well, I
Charlestown?
was there for 8 years, and at the end of my first term, John Kennedy had gotten elected as president, and I was surprised. He, almost after his election, he had some people call me, and I went to see him, and I was sort of a Mickey Mouse guy, and seeing the President of the United States, and he was very friendly, and he said to me, my young brother, do you know Ted? And I said, no, he wants to run for office, and I'd like you to be his manager. So that's how, I'm often asked, how did I get involved? And that's how I got involved.
So that's back to 1960, 62. That's when you feel
62, he
got to know Ted
ended
Kennedy.
up, and then I was with him for helping him off and on.
Oh, you were friends to the end of his life. Very good
Oh, yeah.
friends, yes.
And one of the interesting things, one of my eccentricities is right after he won the convention, where it was a surprise, he beat a very good candidate who was the Attorney General, McCormick, in the primary. And so I ended up running his campaign, and we went from door to door and town to town. And one of the most humorous things that happened to me was we were in a part of Worcester County, which is very desolate, and it was on a Sunday, and we'd been out since 6 o'clock in the morning. And John Kennedy had sort of was the tutor to Teddy, and John Kennedy said one of the most important things is you go out and you campaign, and you should start 6 o'clock in the morning, and then about 2 o'clock. Well, this is most important. You sit in a bathtub and rest for 2 hours. So that's pretty easy, except that we're in remote Worcester County, and it was 2 o'clock, and Teddy was exhausted, and he says, I have to sit in the bathtub. And all we were trees. He said, well, you'll find one. I said, we're in the middle of the woods. So we continued to drive, and there was a lonely house that popped up. And this is probably one of my more challenging experiences. He said, stop the car. I said, what's wrong? He said, why don't you go up and see if I can use their bathtub? Then, I'll get arrested first. Come on, whatever do, I'm exhausted. So I go up and I knock on the door, and no answer, and then I knock the second time, and this fellow comes out in his undershirt. What do you want? I said, I'm with Ted Kennedy. I don't care who the hell you're with. I mean, what do you want? I said, my friend, Ted Kennedy. Real Ted Kennedy? I said, yeah. And I said, Ted, get out of the car. And Ted waved at him. He said, yeah, it's Ted Kennedy. I said, what we want to do is use your bathtub. So there we were in downtown wilderness of Worcester County, and Ted Kennedy spending 2 hours sitting in a bathtub. And so
That just proves to me that you can talk anybody into anything.
Well,
you have that persuasion.
It goes back to when I ran for office. This fellow who gave me some advice and told me that I couldn't win. He said, but if you're going to make the try, what you got to do is knock on doors. So I ended up knocking on almost 2,500 doors and seeing pretty close to 2,000 families. And one of the most significant and most interesting time was I was up on the top of Bunker Hill Street, and there was a 3-decker, and I went in, and the door was open, and I walked to the 3rd floor, knocked on the door, and this young girl, about my age, opened the door. She was wrapped in a towel, and the towel fell, and I ran like hell down the stairs.
Gerard,
So anyway,
Gerard, you really got into the ditches of running for politics. This is amazing. Now, you started the friendship with Teddy Kennedy. Tell me, how did you get to know Bobby Kennedy? Because I know you've known all 3 of them very well.
Well, I would see Teddy a little bit, and a lot. I stayed working. I never was paid, and I never wanted to be paid. They wanted to pay me, but I had enough I could live on, and so I was involved with Teddy, and then he ended up punishing me by making me Democratic state chairman, and we had to raise money, and sort of anecdotally, they wanted me to raise $200,000, and
Now, this goes back to what year?
September of '63.
Goodness, that would be like millions of dollars in today's money.
And anyway, we ended up having a very successful dinner. It's the largest dinner ever held in Boston. We had almost 7,000 people, and we raised $700,000. Oh. So, interestingly enough, the day of the dinner was a Saturday. They called me and said, the president is in town and wants to thank you, and we want you to come over and see him in the hotel. So I went over, all excited. I'm going to see the president, and they admit me, and he's sitting there, and he said, you did a terrific job, and I think you should get a reward. Well, I thought I was going to get a medal, or I was going to get something like that. And he pressed a little buzzer, and he said, we're ready now. So again, I didn't know what they were going to bring in the room. They brought in the 2 largest dishes of chocolate ice cream. That was my reward. And then that night we had a very successful dinner where we had almost 7,000 people who paid $100 each to come to the dinner.
$100 a ticket in those days was a lot of
money.
money.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah.
And then I'd be off and on, and I spent some time as Democratic state chairman, which was sort of a very challenging thing, and then I ended up leaving that, but I was always at Teddy's beck and call. And
now, in reading your book, you go into more detail about each of these stories that you're sharing with us right now. And it is such a fascinating read, you know, and I know you're not going to mention it, but I'm going to mention it, that here you are, a kid that was born and grew up in Charlestown, and you rose to the heights of anyone's career by knowing the president. If he wanted anything, he'd call Gerry Doherty, not Gerard, Gerry Doherty. And they all knew you by first names, and you had a front row seat to many presidential inaugurations. You were at one of the Pope's installations in Rome representing the United States. I mean, who would have thunk, as a kid born in Charlestown, that this would happen in your life? And it's just been marvelous.
It was, and then probably one of the most exciting things that happened was 1968. The president decided not to run for re-election. It would
be Johnson?
Yeah, Johnson. And so...
And he knew you by your first name.
And Bobby Kennedy decided that he would run. And he ended up, the only place he could go, the first place he could go was in Indiana. And Teddy called me and said, "Do you know anything about Indiana?" And I said, "You know, all I know is it's difficult to spell." And he said, "Will you go out and find out what is necessary?" So I went out and I found out that we had to file almost 6,000 signatures, and within a week, and we got Robert Kennedy on the campaign trail, and all the elected officials in Indiana were supporting his opponent, and as a consequence, we had to build an organization, and we were able to do that, and Robert Kennedy ended up being their chosen candidate, who was the governor of Indiana, and so
that was the beginning of your campaigning for Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
And you were the chairman of Indiana,
Yeah.
a place you'd never been to before.
Yeah.
With people
and
you didn't know.
Worked out pretty well, and he worked hard. And one of the most significant things is we had a lot of college students coming in, and we were doing so-so. And they would come on Saturdays. We'd put them up. We would put up 300 students in our. We were in an old theater, and about the fourth Saturday we were doing it, this psychologist came in and wanted permission to go out and go with the canvases, and I said fine. And so later that day he came in and he was all excited, and he said, "We found it." I said, "Found what?" "We found out how we're going to win." I said, you know, "You're crazy." Well, anyway, tell me. He said, "Well, we had all these canvassing groups. We had probably maybe 20 canvassing groups today, and in each group there's 10. And I went with one. And about middle afternoon, this one fellow that I was with went out to a house and knocked on the door, and the people responded, "What the hell do you want?" And "I'm here to help Bob Kennedy run." "Yeah, well, so what?" And you know what? He wants to give people a hand up rather than a handout. And
what a wonderful expression.
Everybody just grasped that's the story.
Hand
and that's
up,
how,
not a hand out. Right.
And that's how we ended up winning. And then election night, he called me, and we were going to go on television, and I said, I can't go on until all these people we brought in from Massachusetts to help come. And so 2 hours later, we went on television, and the thing was concluded, and then he asked me if I would continue with them, and I said, well, I have to go back to my law business for a while, but I will run New York for you. And he said to me, everybody you considers you to be Teddy's friend, and today you proved to be my good friend. And so I made an agreement with them that I would go as a volunteer to New York early in June. And the day before I was to go, I packed my bags. My wife and I went to bed and watched television, and I came on, and Robert Kennedy had been shot, and that was the end of the thing.
That was such a tragedy.
Yeah.
He would have made such a wonderful president.
And as a consequence, the whole thing was over. But for the following 20 years, I was as helpful as I could to Teddy, and we went 3 or 4 times to Ireland, and I had developed a business. I was in the housing business, and everything just went into gel. And
Let's talk about Teddy, because we only have about 5 minutes left. I could talk with you for hours, Gerard, about this. But read his book. That's where you're going to get all the information. So you met Teddy now, and you worked for him when he ran for senator.
yeah.
And tell me about that relationship, because it just grew and grew.
Well, it became a very good relationship. He didn't know what he was doing, and I didn't know a hell of a lot more than he did. But he listened to me, and he ran. First time he ran against a very good candidate, Edward McCormick, who was the Attorney General.
It was a well-known name in politics in Boston, yeah.
And we ended up beating him in the primary, and then we went on and beat him in the general election. And Teddy was very happy. And one of the sort of interesting things was that we were cleaning out the headquarters about a week afterwards, or 2 weeks afterwards, and it was Thanksgiving time. And Teddy said to me, I want you to go with me to dinner tonight. I said, oh. He said, yes, I'm going to have dinner with the prima ballerina of the Bolshoi, the Russian.
Oh, and here you come into your Russian language.
So he said, you pretend to be able to speak Russian. And I said, well, anyway. So anyway, we went out to the prima ballerina, and she was very nice. And after about 10, 15 minutes, Teddy was a needler. He said, oh, my colleague, Jerry, he speaks Russian. Jerry, say something in Russian. And I said, well, I can't, I say something in Russian. So I said something profound like, my father was a fireman in Russia. The head of the Bolshoi, the woman, turned to Teddy and said, your colleague speaks perfect Russian like they do in the university. So that sort of put a little pin in his balloon.
Good for you.
And then as a consequence, he got so excited talking to her and talking about Thanksgiving Day. And do you know about Thanksgiving Day? And she said, no, I don't. What is it? So he explained what Thanksgiving Day is. And Teddy, when he got into things, he would get excited. He said, would you like to have a Thanksgiving dinner on the Cape? And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. So I explained, and she said, well, let me find out if they're going to. So the next day, she called me, and she said, I can come, but I have to bring my troop of about 20 young girls. And so I ended up being the leader, and when we got on the bus, and there were 20 girls plus the ballerina, and we got to Teddy's mother's house. It was Wednesday, and they had these 2 big sort of guards with them, and we went into the foyer, and in the foyer they had a big table with cranberry juice on it. So one of the guards said to me, "Što je to?" which is, what is that? I said, sugar. And he tasted it, and these girls, in a matter of 5 minutes, they devoured the whole thing. And so that's one of I had many good memories of them. But
you certainly did. We have to close out. We only have a couple of minutes left. But I know you more than mentioned it to me, your experiences when Ted Kennedy passed away, that you had the honor of standing guard at his wake. And what were people asking you?
Well, we were there for 4 hours. People, probably about half of them who were very close friends, all asked the same question. How did you get involved with Teddy? And it was a very simple thing. He marched in a parade by my house, and that's how we became
Jack,
friendly.
and then Teddy, and then Bob, and just a wonderful life experience getting to know these people.
It was a great experience. We went to, I ended up later being conscripted by Jimmy Carter, and he sent me to Russia.
You worked with Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, Clinton.
And John Kennedy.
John Kennedy, and then Bobby when he had his run, and then Ted when Ted thought of running up until the convention. Well, we ran out of time, Gerard, and I am so sorry that we ran out of time.
Okay, and thank you very much. You were very nice.
Thank you for spending this time with me here today. And I want to let you all know that here's Gerard's book. It's very, very popular. It was sold out at Marco Island. So that tells you and Gerard is on his way to Ireland to do a book tour there too. But if you want to get a copy, if you're in Charlestown, go to Bunker Hill Florist on Main Street. They have copies there. Excuse me, you can get it on Amazon. Or if you want more information, call his law office at 617-542-8905, and they can give you more details. Gerard, again, thank you for being here with us today. It's been my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. And that's it for this week, folks. Take care of each other. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
There is nothing quite so rare as a townie in City Square. Why not bring back City Square? Lots of action there. There was nothing quite so fair as Dot's Diner in City Square.